Special Operations, Covert Ops, Espionage, The Team House, with your hosts, Jack Murphy and David Park.
Hey everyone, this is episode 346 of The Team House. I'm Jack Murphy here with Dave Park, and our guest on today's show is Erik Rosenblatt. He is a former Department of Homeland Security agent, had a lot of experience in New York and DC, but also international investigations, working on everything from Narco to counter-human trafficking, lots of different stuff that we're going to get into in this episode. Erik, welcome to the show, man.
Yeah, great to be here. Thank you so much. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. So you told us before the show you're from Long Island originally. Tell us a little bit about growing up in Long Island and, you know, how that sort of the pathway that you took to federal law enforcement.
Yeah, I mean, I lived up to every stereotype, Long Island stereotype, you know, gel in the hair, polyester shirt, you know, tanning. We were the original like, gym tan laundry folks. But I grew up in, typical Long Island, suburban life. I had great parents, great upbringing. I did okay in school. I did well. It bored me a lot of the times, but I enjoyed some of it. I grew up I grew up in a neighborhood where it wasn't law enforcement oriented. There wasn't a lot of people in civil service. It was a lot of accountants and other things. And, it was really hard to resist that path. I did have a sense that I wanted to be a physician. I always wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon. It seemed like a good path. I was certainly interested in it. I studied it in college, but then I was faced with certain organic chemistry and some other classes, and I'll pretend to think that I could push through that and went to med school and been successful. But I like to think that I had a higher calling. Not that being a physician is not a high calling, but I always felt a sense of I needed to do something, civil service, protect, defend. I seemed to be that guy a lot of times. Growing up with a little sister, of course, I was always out there ready to fight on her behalf and others. And I think it just transitioned to I was looking at this career ahead of me to be a physician, while worthwhile. But then I just knew that I had to fulfill the mission that I felt like I had to do. It was a sense of duty. And I couldn't deny it. And, so I went through college and then suddenly took a turn and realized, hey man, like this is what I have to do. And I started a new chapter in my education and my pursuits.
So were you state or local law enforcement before going federal?
No, I went right to federal, which is, it's a blessing and a curse, right? Because, I always, like I said, I had the ambitions of being in law enforcement, and this is where people sometimes go wrong. There's a wide range of law enforcement. Like to your point, you have local law enforcement. I mean, you're in uniform, you're out there, you're in the moment, right? You're responding to calls, you're doing different types of work. You have tours, you see things on the daily that are just unreasonable for a human to see for 20 years, right, until they retire. Hopefully, to make the retirement. I always was interested in behind the scenes, the snatch and grab, surveillance, rather than just, wearing a uniform, patrolling, while, very rarely would a young man grow up and not think that's incredibly interesting. I did, but I knew as I broke it down that I knew that I wanted to I want to be a federal special agent. I knew that I wanted to do federal law enforcement. And I'm lucky and I'm grateful that I had some mentors as I was making that transition from being a physician to, this world of federal law enforcement, that I had some guidance to help me understand that the path and what the path is. I think it benefits a ton having that local law enforcement experience and then transitioning to federal agents, being a federal agent in lieu of maybe perhaps being a detective at the local agency. There's a lot of pros. There's certainly a lot of cons. We can, happy to discuss that. But, I'm grateful that I took my path, and I don't feel like I missed out. But, I do see how it's certainly helpful going from one to the other.
So I'm trying to work out the timeline in my own mind. As I recall, Department of Homeland Security came after 9/11.
Right.
What year is this that you're getting into law enforcement?
Yeah. So this is in the late 90s, even though I hate saying that. I started out with the U.S. Customs Service Office of Investigations, right? So I had, I had a lot of mentors. I had a mentor from the FBI, I had a mentor from DEA and Customs. And I got to tell you, I sat down with all of them, and I would have been lucky to be at any agency. But then I sat down with a guy from Customs, and someone from FBI is like, yeah, we do bank robbery and all kinds of things. I'm like, that's pretty cool, little Point Break there. I could get into that. But then the guy from Customs is like, he takes out his Smith, and he has rubber bands around it, like the handle, the grip. And he's telling me about all these wild things that he's done in the past few weeks. I'm like, yeah, I'll do that. And super great. I came in, man, I was just I was a normal guy. I didn't have any remarkable experience in the military or prior police. But that's the thing about federal law enforcement. It's you would expect that certainly there's a preference in some areas. If you know if you're an operator, or if you have some police experience, or certainly if you have prior detective experience, that's an incredible turnkey opportunity for an agency to hire. But the thing is with that type of job, with being a special agent for pretty much any of the agencies, it's all about life experience or just perspective or ability to write. Because at the end of the day, you can do all these cool things as an agent, but your job is to report facts, to write reports, to collect evidence and testify about it. Certainly you get to do cool things, you get to hit doors and conduct surveillance and travel internationally, but it's in pursuit of making cases. It's not just for fun. So that's what the beautiful thing about federal law enforcement is, because you have so many people. I work with true heroes, true operators from military, and then I work with, people who had, I worked with a guy who was a chiropractor prior life, a lot of attorneys, a lot of, this and that. So it's a pretty wild scene, but, people come together for a reason.
Can you tell us about Customs? Because that's not really, when I think of Customs, I think of people checking shit that comes off of a flight, right? Yeah. Can you tell us the law enforcement roles and the breadth of the operations that you guys have?
Sure. So prior to 9/11, before the creation of Homeland Security, the Customs Department was under Treasury, right? Because the primary purpose of Customs, established in 1789, was to collect taxes, right? So from there, you have the typical. So there's two parts of Customs service, and in the enforcement side, you had the field ops, which is the people you see at the airport, the inspectors at the time they were called, going through items, at the airports or ports of entry, if we're looking for contraband, but also for a greater purpose of collecting tax. Then you had a smaller unit of Customs called Office of Investigations. It was probably at the time, it was about 2,500 special agents, I would say globally. And the Customs special agents were the U.S. primary investigators for border crimes. So anything to do with an international nexus was a Customs investigation. The very cool thing about it is that takes us everywhere. That took us everywhere. But then you also have overlap with with agencies like the DEA. DEA is the government's drug enforcement administration, right? So you can have overlap certainly internationally because for the most part, especially back in the 80s, 90s, and even the early 2000s, drugs were imported from Colombia, Mexico, and other areas, Middle East. So you had overlap. So that caused two things. One, it was a great thing because my first partner was a DE agent. Basically, we just did everything together, and it worked out incredibly well. But then it also caused a lot of, there's a lot of territory, conflict, and people trying to make cases and get promoted, and bosses that want, they want a position at the podium for a press conference. So, I think that led to one of the reasons that the Department of Homeland Security was created, because you had that overlap, you had that friction. As an agency, you had the ability to not collaborate on cases. And that's, one of the things that transformed the government after 9/11. So the U.S. Customs Service ultimately, to this day, is now, the Office of Investigations is now Homeland Security Investigations, the primary investigative branch of Homeland Security, where I was. And then the inspector branch, the uniformed personnel of Customs Service transitioned to Customs and Border Protection, which is under the Homeland Security Department, but now includes Border Patrol. So you have the agents, the border agents in between ports, and then you have the CBPO officers at the ports of entry.
On that note, you said that you worked out of Building 6 at the World Trade Center.
I did.
Tell us about 9/11 and what that was like for you.
Yeah, I mean, I was just a few months in. I started my career, with the Customs Service, and I was assigned to a task force at that covered JFK. I did that for several years, and it was an honor to, start my career with the NYPD on a task force. After doing that for several years, I think it was June or July of 2001, I was sent to work at the main customs office at 6th World Trade Center on this financial crimes group, working money laundering cases, with cartel money laundering cases. So, I was there for a few months. I had the experience of working at that building, even though I was in the building frequently, just to collaborate with the main office people. And one of the wonderful things about the World Trade Center is that it was little known that there was a range underneath that we used. So that was pretty cool, right? Like, surprise, surprise. Yeah. So, we go qualify at the range. We quietly walk through a door. There was an escalator going up to, from the lower floor of the Trade Center up to ground level. And we just walk out, be like, you have no clue what's going on in there. So that was pretty special. I was on assignment, temporary assignment in Florida, and the day one and the towers were hit. It was a pretty incredible time. I thought, I didn't know what was happening. I saw it on the news with everyone else. We brought it on the TV, watched the towers get hit. Obviously, you can imagine what was going through my mind like everyone else, but I'm like, two things went through my mind, like, oh shit, like a couple things. We're at war, people are going to die. And then I left my friends behind. Like, It was really painful, right? So I'm sitting there with other agents in the room, and we're like, I was the only one from New York, I think, and it was just too much. It was a lot. And of course, my instinct was to grab I didn't need a go bag. I just grabbed whatever was around and was just ready to head back out. And, that stalled a bit because, for obvious reasons, they didn't want anybody. They wanted a ground stop of everyone, accountability, and make sure everyone's all right. So then the next day, not even, to their credit, sometimes you have just great leaders. One of the senior leaders of the Florida office that we were at handed me his car keys, his G-Rod keys, his government car, and said, go, right? So he handed me the keys, and I just drove straight up to New York, rendezvoused with everyone who was, thankfully, no one was lost. Everyone got out before the second tower, the towers came down. And then I was able to get back there like a day later and just, work that mound. So that was the next few weeks of our lives, working the site, and then eventually working our way to the offsite in Staten Island called Freshkill, where a lot of the building, the debris and other things, if you know what I mean, were transported by barge to Staten Island, and that's where we sifted through all the material for several weeks. So, we're talking about like when shit gets real. Yeah, for evidence. So, so we sifted through evidence, for evidence, and then, and this is really stuck with me. We sifted through the evidence, and it was pretty surreal, in the sense I've only had a couple years on that job, and when you get on, like I said, you don't have that experience like you do as a detective, where you have several years as patrol under your belt to deal with that kind of trauma. I mean, you see terrible things as an agent. You see, you could certainly be in danger, and you can see terrible things, especially when it comes to child exploitation and human trafficking. You see terrible things, but nothing, that's real. That's when shit got real. That's like if you became an agent just because you wanted to pretend, or you thought it was cool on TV. That's when things become real, and then so you realize how important it is that you collect evidence, but you become numb to it. Right. A lot of people, I have friends, 5 or 6 friends that I work with on the Mando who passed away to blood disease at this point. It's a reality. Right. And, I live with that on the daily, and it's tough to think about, especially with family and friends, just monitoring my health. So if anything stuck with me, that's, certainly one of them. But getting back to that point, we collected evidence and there was a couple buckets. So we were on this, we were at Fresh Kill, and it was just a big area, and then the bulldozers would come in and dump debris material, and then they would spread it out. And then we would all have our white outfits on, pretending we were being smart. There's debris, there's dust flying everywhere. We'd have our, we go into these white tents and with tacky floors, and then we take off masks thinking that we're in a safe spot, there's nothing to see here. Our health is gonna be fine in the future. But, we go out, we do these grid patterns, and you'd find material, evidence, sensitive material perhaps, and then you put it in certain buckets. But there was this one bucket, it was a red bucket, and it was the ME. So sometimes you'd find something, and it looked like wood, perhaps, right? You'd think it was a piece of wood, but it could be bone. And I remember this very clearly. Everyone would stop if someone picked something up, and someone starts walking towards that red bucket. It's like, oh, they found a body or some evidence of a body. And it wasn't because they found it. It's just I truly believe first and foremost in their minds is we just identified somebody who's lost. And, it's a trying experience. And if your head wasn't in the game after that, after picking up those materials, or if you see a wallet, I found how many wallets with family photos in it, or a bag of gifts in the World Trade Center gift shop, and, with a receipt in it, and it was just left there, but it kind of matured you very quickly. And I could say, it's almost like family from all the different agencies who participated. Going back so long ago, it's a family now. But, you just hope for that as the ME came around to pick up that red bucket, to look through the red bucket, everyone would stop again. And they would watch the MEs go through it, and then to see if they picked up something that they believe is a bone fragment, or if it was, something other, and they just put it aside. And then it was pretty satisfying when they got back on their golf cart and they drove away with that, and that perhaps you found somebody, and then there'll be some closure. So, that kind of woke you up. And then and the other part of that is, work, I spent a lot of time with everyone else from customs and all the different agencies, driving around, sitting on the, the mountains, going through the pile, at the Trade Center, and it was pretty wild. And going back to that scene, it was surreal because, sort of way different than it is now. There was a time when we were walking around in uniform or just raid jackets I would literally have an MP5. I remember this. I was walking around downtown Manhattan with an MP5 hanging down, going to get lunch at a supermarket. And it was just, where are we? What's going on here? And people would come up and hug you, or you're not paying for lunch. And then there would be that, West Side Highway, that wall of people with signs thanking law enforcement and thank you all you do. And I felt bad that they were out there doing that because this is my job. And, I was grateful and embarrassed, because I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. But, so at this, it was a horrible time, but at the same time, it was unique and special in the sense that it brought so many people together, to get shit done as a law enforcement, a law enforcement effort, but also community, which has since been lost for sure.
So also during your early years, you got involved in the Narco stuff with NYPD. Let's talk a little bit about that, and then I guess we'll start as Homeland Security comes on the scene, talk about that transition.
Yeah, got on at the academy. I just like everyone else, we thought we were hot shit. I had this brand new badge. Like I said, the brand new 511, tactical pants, clean. Brand new holster, shiny. And listen, if you weren't put in your place, so then my first assignment, thankfully, was worked with the finest, NYPD detectives. So then, and they called us out, they had this, it was a U.S. Customs investigations and NYPD task force. And we were at the airport, and the purpose of it was to, at the time when narcotics was coming in to the airports, especially Kennedy, it was hand over fist. I mean, we couldn't respond quick enough. We didn't have enough people to respond to all the calls for the interception of cocaine and heroin. It could be inside people, people swallow it. It could be on their person. It could be stuck inside them. It could be in suitcases. I mean, there's a million different ways. So our responsibility was to respond to your, like we discussed before, to the uniform part of customs, who would then detain them, and then we come over and we conduct the investigation outside the port of entry, i.e. the airport, or it could be in between ports at the land borders. But in this case, it was the airport.
Hey guys, it's Jack. I want to tell you guys about the sponsor for today's show. It's Mando. Mando makes a whole series of male grooming products. They are unique in that they are a deodorant that you can use all over your body, on armpits if you like, but also wherever else you may deem necessary. And I have been using these products for about 3 months now. I've been using the body wash. It's bourbon leather. I've been using their bar of soap, which I really enjoyed, and also their deodorant. And so I exercise a lot and get very sweaty, so I need a deodorant that's gonna do the job, and Mando has come through for me. You know, the body wash was great. I actually used all of that, need to reorder some more. But the bar of soap was also very cool. It was very smooth, actually. So I hope you guys will go and check them out. They have a starter kit that's up there, and they have a special deal for Team House viewers. So the starter pack is perfect for new customers. It comes with a solid stick deodorant, cream tube deodorant, 2 free products of your choice, like mini body wash and deodorant wipes, and free shipping. As a special offer for listeners, new customers get $5 off a starter pack with our exclusive code. That equates to over 40% off your starter pack. Use code TEAMHOUSE at shopmando.com. That's shopmando.com. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. Smell fresher, stay drier, and boost your confidence from head to toe with Mando.
So we would conduct controlled deliveries, and it was just incredible time, because here I am, like I said, freshly out of the academy, all shiny and cool, and then I just get schooled on the daily by these seasoned NYPD detectives.
Right.
Been through it all, saw it all, and like I remember, and this is the thing about my experience there. It wasn't like, hey, come in and take a breath and learn. I walked in the second day, it's like, here's your case, go. Right? And go interview them, collect the evidence, I mean, it was just, okay, sure. But I remember when I realized my first case of like, okay, this shit's real, is that I was out, we were doing a couple search warrants with NYPD. We're doing with NYPD narcotics outside the airport. So again, they're in the street every day, hitting bodegas, hitting houses. And we're walking in again, I was wearing, it's so embarrassing, wearing a blue collar shirt, similar to this, with a badge and my tan pants, and let's do this. I walk in, these guys are wearing they have 38s on their hips, hanging down. And I remember a guy had on his vest. He flipped it open, he was about to put it on, and it said, my blood type is A whatever. I'm like, holy crap. Okay, and then, so that was my first real, okay, let's, that was, I'm really in law enforcement. And, so I learned a lot from that. I learned everything from them, and of course the seasoned agents. Okay, so then, wonderful experience. I worked international narcotics cases. I did so many, I had trials. I had, dozens of arrests. I put cuffs on people. I had foot chase, gunpoint. I mean, there's nothing I didn't experience in those first few years, which is really unusual for federal law enforcement, because in other agencies and other offices, you could go a year or two and not even put cuffs on somebody unless it's, in custody. It's like, I can't tell you how many times. So I had that remarkable experience where I think set myself up, and certainly the people in the New York office like me, for success, right? And it also weeded out, it separated the people, the real deal, the people that had it, that were right for the job, and from the people that were wrong for the job. The people that were wrong for the job, who took a side job, administrative or more white collar types of cases. But that experience really taught you what you're made for. Are you ready for, are you ready for violence? Do you understand that, these people are, that you're up against are real bad people and not just make believe? It's not, and that's, and it was a remarkable experience. After after several years, that's when I transitioned and moved to the World Trade Center. And then, man, even just, a few months before the towers were hit, I worked in money laundering operations, undercover ops, targeting the cartels, Colombian cartels, and conducting undercover money laundering operations against them to, to identify their money laundering networks and certainly their smuggling networks. It was a remarkable experience. And then to the credit of the government.
Before we move on, I'd just love to hear a little bit more about like the money laundering.
Yeah.
Like
how do you identify it? How do you track it? Without giving away TTPs.
Not that I'm sitting here taking notes.
Yeah, right.
But I mean,
right.
I am kind of interested to know how they do that.
He's not working for the Sinaloa cartel. I promise.
That's okay. Yeah. Listen. No, listen. It was. The government has the ability. So part of what you brought up before, part of this. Of the purpose of being an agent is collecting evidence. By collecting evidence, you also arrest people and you flip them, because really there's nothing better than a cooperating, like a cooperator or a confidential informant. Sure, you're dealing with bad people doing bad things, but you cannot do your job without their help, right? And sometimes you have to keep your enemies closer, right? So, whether or not you flip somebody and they become an informant and they cooperate, or you arrest somebody and then they become a cooperating defendant pursuant to an agreement, of course, with the U.S. Attorney's Office and everything. So the way that you went about it is like when you sell lots of drugs in the United States, the money has to go back to Colombia, right? So let's use Colombia, for example. So what better way to identify the money launderers than become a money launderer yourself? And then that was an authorization that the U.S. government had to conduct in these money laundering operations. So it's pretty simple. You conduct you pick up money locally from the drug dealers and from their operatives in the New York area, for example, and then you launder the money to Colombia, and then you see where the money goes, and then you collect. Then you wait and you wait and you wait. Like you hear, like federal cases take years sometimes, and you just wait, and then you just bring down the hammer, and you rip the organization apart. At least temporarily, right? Dismantle, disrupt, and you do what you can. And then you arrest, everything is in cooperation with, foreign governments. I don't think people appreciate, nor should they have any insight, typically, on how important international cooperation is in the law enforcement world. Like working with the Colombians and working with, the prosecutors and having people embedded in Colombia from the U.S. government at the embassies it's a remarkable thing. It's the only way it could work. And we had that ability then and now.
So it's like a large scale, what's the term the law enforcement uses when they let a certain amount of money walk, right?
Yeah, money walk. Yeah.
Yeah. But it sounds like this was kind of on a grander scale.
It's a pretty grand scale, but listen, it's not easy. There's a lot of risk. You have undercover agents. You have these cooperators who are by true nature just they're bad, they're really bad, and
right.
There's a lot you're putting them. They're in danger. They could be endangering themselves by cooperating if it's discovered that they're working with the government. But we did the best we can, and I had no experience with losing any cooperators because we were just professionals and we took it seriously.
Okay. So after you were a lawful money launderer, what was the next step for you in your career?
Yeah, and then I just after a couple of years of I spent as we transitioned to the Department of Homeland Security, right? So after the 9/11 attacks, the government kind of just said, "Hey, listen, we need to do better internally. We need to, have less, almost like interagency cooperation. It should be just partnerships," and that was their attempt to be determined if it was successful or not. It's just you still have humans doing, like I said, you have people who want to make cases on their own. You have people who want to get promoted. It's just, so everyone's going to try to run amok. But they created the Department of Homeland Security in an attempt to streamline things. And part of it was the dismantling, getting rid of the Department of the U.S. Customs Service. The U.S. Customs Service, was taken apart. And then the part that I worked in was, ultimately now what's called Homeland Security Investigations, which is the investigative branch of Homeland Security, right? So you could call it almost like the equivalent of the FBI to the Justice Department, right? We're sort of like a catch-all, anything to do with the border and other, and certainly some domestic crimes. But it's a very big agency. It's fairly new and brand, and so compared to the FBI, which is plus 100 years old, and DEA started out in the 70s, and ATF, and all these other agencies. So it's a really wonderful organization, very powerful with a lot of jurisdiction. So I was able to, like I said, I grew up in a normal household. My dad was an accountant, debits and credits. He thought it was the coolest thing in the world. I'm like, I don't get it. You're weird. And then what happens? They're like, hey, Erik, you're going to go work, you're going to work these money laundering cases. And then after 9/11, they assigned me to these terrorist financing cases. And I'm like, oh gosh, this is going to be awful. But I realized how terrific financial crimes are, because, why do people do bad things? Except for, these savages in and MS-13 and other, violent crime, violent gangs, international and domestic gangs, who just kill for fun or pleasure. I don't know what it is. These networks, these transnational criminal organizations and local criminals do it for profit, right? So it was a wonderful, the concept of working financial crime cases, which is a priority for Homeland Security investigations, is to go after the money, right? So I just realized wow, this is for me. So, I owe my father, an apology. He had passed, but I didn't get the chance to tell him, but, I was wrong. He was right. Debits and credits are pretty cool, but because there's nothing more satisfying. I mean, there's a lot of things, but in that job, but then taking people's shit away from them after they risked everything.
Yeah.
Right. Take this shit, seizing it, freezing it. And then it was just such a gratifying thing. And then the cool thing is, and people don't appreciate, is that, you could have people do several different kinds of criminal activity. You could have them doing human smuggling or terrorism or gun trafficking. At the end of the day, if you hit them with a money laundering charge, that's gonna put them out for 20 years. So and then so if you could build, and that's why we targeted the cartels this way, right? Because it was a really good charge. It was a money laundering charge, and you have conspiracy and you have smuggling. So it really it set the bandwidth of all these opportunities to charge them with including conspiracy.
Follow the money that helped you map out the network, right?
Follow the money. I mean, that's what we used to say. Follow the money. And then, and that's and so it's great because then you look at these cartels when cartel is synonymous with trafficking drugs, right? But cartels will do anything to make money. They'll traffic people, they'll traffic things, they'll do anything they need to do to make money. Oil, you see now oil.
In Mexico.
But the cool thing is, like I said, as long as you can prove that they are trafficking something, and you can, and they make money, and you can trace the money. To your point, follow the money. You can make a money laundering case, and that really hurts. That's a ton of leverage, and it's cool because one, put them away for a long time. Like I said, take their shit, and then perhaps flip them, right? Because it's a pretty hard charge to look at. If you're looking at that kind of time, and one of the things about working for the federal government, you hear the term, the phrase, don't make a federal case out of it. So the benefit of being a Fed is, your cases, you can pick and choose your cases. And, with the U.S. Attorney's Office, especially in New York, being so powerful and just, really smart, they're going to take cases only where they know they could win for the most part. I mean, there's risk and they'll take their chances. But if you're indicted by the feds, say a prayer. Because it's a good chance, the probabilities you're going to be charged and you can be convicted either by the jury or you're going to plead out. So it's a really good incentive to have people flip too. So then we have that pool of things. So I really I enjoyed financial crimes, conducting money laundering and financial frauds crimes so much. I spent the rest of my career focusing on that with some diversions into other things as I moved through the ranks. For several years, working these financial crime cases, I then became the head of what's called the El Dorado Financial Crimes Task Force, which is the largest and most important. I think it's it's the most important financial crimes task force in the world. It's a place where you have almost all the federal and local agencies, working, and then you have international agencies working in one office at Homeland Security Investigations, conducting financial crimes. And that's really where we're talking about the Homeland Security Department, its inception and the idea behind it of like, let's work together in the same room. So we have to look at each other in the eyes before we screw each other, kind of thing. It's been a success for over 30 years. So I had the great opportunity for several years to run that task force, which it was a remarkable experience. And then, through the years, I was brought into Washington, D.C., talking about cons about being a Fed as opposed to local. Local, you're going to go home. The worst you could do, if you screw up, you get what's called highway therapy, right? If you're working in a great precinct in Manhattan and then they're going to make you drive 2 hours to Staten Island for a couple of months, with feds, not that, so much punishing you, but, you're signing up to work anywhere in the country. Mm-hmm. You're not forced to work internationally, but that's an option. So technically I could, I could go to Washington, I could go to Texas, I could go wherever. But as you move through the ranks, Washington, D.C. is a smart move because that's where you learn, the bureaucracy and become a bureaucrat and, learn how to tie your tie and make a knot. And but it's important to know how things work. So I spent several years in headquarters. I had the great opportunity during the uprising and the Arab uprising to join the Department of Justice and Treasury, working on those cases, looking at Mubarak's cabinet and looking for kleptocrats. That was a special time in my life too.
During the Arab Spring, so they were trying to nail bad actors because I was reading about it recently, actually, how there's this push and pull in the United States government depending on the day. Some days we were like, yeah, we like the Arab Spring. Other days we're like, we don't. But there's all these concerns that Mubarak was our boy for so long. Do we really want him out? Tell us a little from your perspective.
It was frustrating because we had some clarity in what was going on, and you talk about what's called kleptocrats. Kleptocracy is essentially just people in power, whether it's appointed or elected or just taken. People who have influence in government who then steal from the government. Almost like as a as an organized crime unit, right? Like they're conducting criminal activity and taking from. So that had a lot to do with what was going on with the Arab Spring. So Mubarak's cabinet and people around him were, they were accused of, of taking a lot of money and operating on their own behalf. And, so it was frustrating in the sense, to your point, where, we'd make these great cases. We travel the world. We'd find cooperators and we thought we had pretty damn good cases. But then, to your point, depending on the mood, on the moment, maybe maybe it's not the right time to take down this case. Maybe it's not the right time to put this on the front, in the news. So let's defer this case for a while.
What would you be charging those people with? Because we're talking about foreign citizens, right?
Yeah, but a lot of them had property and facilitated movement of money through the United States. Mm-hmm. That's the thing. There's a nexus. If you touch an ATM in Manhattan, good luck. Because then, the U.S. Attorney's Office has that in the Southern District of New York, or the Eastern District. So you would have that, and then you would. So as long as you find some nexus to the United States, how it affects the United States, you have a case. Mm-hmm. So and then that was just a wonderful experience too. That brought me onto the international stage. I got to work. Certainly when I was working in narcotics, I had a lot of travel, to South America essentially, and Argentina, Colombia, and elsewhere. Which was terrific. But then, I got a lot of travel because then, a lot of the potential cooperators were located all over the world. They were hiding out in the corner somewhere, and we come knocking on the door, and they're like, "Uh-oh." So
what were some of the more interesting experiences traveling abroad that you can share?
Yeah, I had one experience. I was, I was in the Middle East. And I was there I was there for two reasons. I was there to work a case, but I was there to also instruct. So there's two parts of that. There was a 2-part trip, and one of them I was part of this instruction crew, and we were instructing their intelligence and police force. And I was up at a podium in front of 30, 40 people, and there was translation in the corner. Everyone was listening, and I had a block to teach on corruption, on kleptocracy, and I was speaking, and I was on a mic, and And all of a sudden, I started talking about how it's unacceptable to take money from, a bribe, or and you should report anybody that, that takes a bribe. And I had somebody stand up who was pretty large and walk up to me with a lot of anger, and I didn't understand him, but he was lecturing me on how it's part of, it's not unusual and there's nothing wrong with it, and I'm like, okay. And I used to tell by the spit coming out of his mouth and his posture that I should probably end this. Yeah. I didn't have to listen to what the translator was saying in my ear. I said, okay, well, let's move on. So that was pretty remarkable. But part of it was just exciting in the sense that I got to spend a lot of time with international law enforcement where I would have never otherwise experienced. And for example, we spent some time with their international police and their intelligence service, and they take us out. I remember it's like it was yesterday. They take us out for fun at night. So we decided we're gonna do these scenarios where we're on ATVs in the desert in the night, and there's gonna be role players who are gonna be terrorists, and we have to chase down. It was several hours, and we have to chase down these terrorists. We have to find them. We have to interview them. So I'm like, oh my God! I'm like, how is this not the coolest thing in the world?
Hey guys, our show is sponsored by GhostBed. Check them out, please. They make awesome mattresses, awesome pillows, awesome bedding. GhostBed provides high quality and super comfortable award-winning mattresses crafted in the US and Canada. Did you know that 60% of US adults report being too hot when they're trying to sleep? That's me. I'm a sweaty little baby. That's why we designed all of our products with cooling features so you stay comfortable and asleep all night long. Pair any of our mattresses with GhostBed's award-winning adjustable base and get the ultimate sleep experience. GhostBed rules the family-owned business, 60,000 plus 5-star reviews. They have sleep experts on staff with 20 plus years of experience. So if you have any questions, you can hit them up and ask them, maybe what kind of mattresses work for you. 20 plus year warranty. That's 2 times the industry standard. Free shipping and returns on mattresses. Most of the products ship out within 24 hours. They have in-house customer support and sleep experts chilling in Plantation, Florida. It rules. It's the best. They give you 101 nights risk-free to make sure that these beds are right for you. If you don't like it after 101 nights, you could send it back, full refund. When you purchase a GhostBed mattress, your comfort guaranteed. I'm reading it right now, and it's capital letters, guaranteed. Okay? They do the right thing, and they're a great company. If you're not sure which GhostBed's right for you, like I said before, you could take their mattress quiz online, or you can give a call to one of their sleep experts, and they'll help you with exactly what you possibly could need, what works for you and what doesn't. And the best news about this is, Team House listeners and viewers, you get an extra 10% off site-wide for a limited time. You just go to ghostbed.com/house and use the code HOUSE at checkout. One more time, that's ghostbed.com/house with the code HOUSE, HOUSE, at checkout for an extra 10% off site-wide. I want to thank GhostBed for their continued support. I want to thank all the fans that listen and watch for their continued support. Without you guys, we are nothing. So thank you for supporting the show, and thank you for supporting the companies that help support the show. ghostbed.com/house for 10% off. Made in the US, made in Canada. Shout out to our brothers in Canada. They rock. Check them out. I love GhostBed. Thanks, guys.
So we're in the middle. We get driven to this location. What's not in the desert? Light. So we're on these. They're like, all right. So we have these ATVs, and then some people, they dressed up as terrorists, and then we get on these ATVs, and we're at a point where I identified where they were. So then we're like, all right, so let's go chase them down. So I'm like, great, this is cool. It's gonna be like riding on the beach. Cool, no problem. We're on these ATVs, flying through the desert, pitch dark, at night, like nothing, all except for our little headlight. And we go, all of a sudden I see these big boulders, these big, right? I'm like, holy, so we're dodging all these boulders. And I'm like, okay, like I'm in over my head again. And then I'm like, of course, what's the last thing you should do? Think about the consequence of your actions in the moment. I'm like, okay, so if something happens, if I flip and I break a bone, this and that, are they gonna medevac me? No. I mean, I don't know what they're gonna do. Put me on a camel? I had no clue. ATV, back, 3 hours into the nearest, makeshift hospital. But man, it was so much fun. And then, but those are how do you, 14-year-old Erik, like if you saw that, like,
Yeah.
I was those, listen, I had, like I said, the ups and downs of this job. It's the kind of job you can make the most of. If you make the most of it, it's remarkable. But then, like I said, you have the slugs,
Yeah.
who then just, do the minimum. And like I tell you, when I was a boss, I wasn't the guy that you want, if you work for and you were a slug, I had my own way of version of highway therapy, and so I would make sure that they would, they would remember that the job is a little bit, because I loved the job so much. I had so much pride in doing the work, that if you didn't get along with other agencies, I mean, like, sometimes I would definitely have bombed, other 3-letter agencies, certainly behind closed doors. But if you couldn't get along with other agents and couldn't keep your eye on the mission, or if you just thought that, doing the minimum was okay, and then you just ride it out to get your pension, after 20, 25 years, or worse, you stay until you're mandatory and take a coveted spot where someone else, who wants to come in and do the right thing, I made sure that they knew that they were, they should maybe move on. But again, it's the security and the ability to do that job. I mean, where else are you going to go? It's not like if I became a physician, I could go to there's hospitals all over the world, the world, or domestically that I can go to. But if you want to be a special agent and do this kind of work, there's only a few agencies, right? It's a coveted role. And if you're going to be so lucky, whether you earned it or not, to have that job, you better appreciate it. So, but it's hard with the federal government, especially with now to to do anything. If you have these slugs who people don't appreciate, who might be, I'm not gonna say dangerous, to others, because if you're stacking up at a door, I know who I wanted up, behind me, tapping on my shoulder, saying, okay, let's do this. But it's really hard to get rid of people. So, sometimes it was super frustrating as I moved through the ranks.
I was going to ask you, you brought up a really interesting point about the whole corruption thing. In the United States, like the administrations, all of them, and the politicians and everybody, like they have this very naive worldview, I think, a lot of times. How did you guys navigate, like, that these foreign countries, they are not the United States. The president takes money, the police chief takes money from, his subordinates. They take money from their subordinates. They set up illegal checkpoints to get a little baksheesh because that's how they feed their families, right? Like, you're not going to go in there over a training course and change the entire way they've been doing business for 200 years, or 1,000 years or whatever. Like, how hard was that for you to navigate when you were working like these international situations?
Going back to the point of you work these cases and you build the case with evidence internationally, with cooperation from, international governments, and whether they want to or not, they provide you evidence to make a case. And it comes down to whether it's the right time or not, even if you have a strong case, because some people are just so important to the government, right? It's better to have them as a source of information, or an ally, or a facilitator of things that the Americans want in a certain location, right? So, you have to do that dance with the State Department. So it kind of aligns with what you're asking, is the sense that I go into these now, like that was a moment, right? That moment in the Middle East was like, okay, again, it was another okay, the shit's real moment.
Yeah.
Right. And you go in with eyes wide open, understanding that this is who you're dealing with. And are you going to bring them into the United States and put them on the stand? No.
Right.
But are you going to then take their information and construct it parallelly, do parallel construction of the evidence to try to, make a case? Sure. Or do you just take the information and walk away from it? The situation, that's what you sometimes do. But it's a dance, and it was, I'm not saying, I didn't walk in there. Of course, I walked in there as an arrogant American, thinking my shit does, this is the way we do things. So why do you do it this way? But yeah, to your point, this is a new culture we have. It's only how we, and we're going back thousands of years and we can't argue with them. So we just have to work with them.
Yeah.
It was super rare. I mean, it was super rare. It's only in the serious national security cases, certainly when it comes to terrorism, or definitely with money laundering when it comes to, Afghan or, Wallace, different types of money laundering investigations. But to your point, you just tolerate it. Mm-hmm. You work around it.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us the Argentina story?
Oh yeah, that was. So here I am. Like I said, I expected to come into this job and kind of just dillied out. I was excited. I was willing to do anything, but everyone's like, just stay at arm's length for a while, just watch and learn. I'm telling you, like the second, third weekend, we responded to a case that Customs, intercepted at the airport, and it was heroin inside of jackets and other elements. It was a smuggling ring. So the cool thing is, so here I am, agent. I had my DEA partner and some other agents from Customs working this case together, and I was the case agent along with my partner from the DEA, who became a really good friend. And we started working this big network in Argentina. So again, like here we are, a couple, maybe 6 to 8 months into this job, and we have to go to Argentina, right? And with the Justice Department and with the prosecutors to meet with the local leadership, law enforcement leaders at the embassy. So we're like, oh, this is cool. We get to brief them, and it's terrifying, but it's like, I'm going to Argentina. Okay, it was very cool. Buenos Aires is great. So I had several opportunities to go there, but one of the times we went there, I felt like we were walking around, and I felt like, I had that spidey sense, like hopefully that most people have in this industry, in this world. And I'm like, what's going on here? So I said, it turns out that I talked to my DEA buddy, and we were walking together, and with the third from the Justice Department. I'm like, hey man, listen, I know, I'm gonna sound like I'm watching TV, too many cop shows or spy shows, but do you feel like we're being followed? He's like, oh my God, yeah, I feel like the same thing. I feel like, what's going on? I'm like, I don't know, but we should probably tell our bosses at the embassy. So we're like, do you want it? They're gonna laugh at us. So we're like, well, let's try it. So we go, and I go speak with our head, the representative, the customs, or now the HSI representative at the embassy. I'm like, hey man, listen, crucify me if you think I'm ridiculous, but I feel like we're being followed. He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, it felt like there was people, we felt the presence following us, and then I remembered. I'm like, wait, I was on the phone in my hotel, and I heard a click on the phone, and perhaps it could have been just static, but back in the day when technology wasn't great, you sometimes have that interference when you're wiretapping a phone. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, listen, I think I heard a click on my phone, and I feel like we're being followed. He's like, motherfucker, and he's just F-bomb. He's like, those motherfuckers. So he goes to the intelligence community at the embassy, starts yelling. He's like, those bastards, they're following you. Because back then, still to this day, when you're coming to a country, whether it's a foreign country coming to the United States or vice versa, you want to know why they're there, and perhaps they're meeting with people that you could, that you're cooperating, but that they can take and flip themselves.
Right.
So it wasn't anything like dangerous per se. They're just trying to figure out, listen, when you come into the country, you have to fill out paperwork, and they know so they're just probably curious about what we're doing, So I'm like, and then I got to be honest with you, he's telling us yeah, man, he kind of validated us. We're like, yeah, I felt like, okay, we're doing something worthwhile that people want to follow us, but probably weren't.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, you could have just asked me where I was going and who I was meeting with.
Of course. And then, so they're like, they ran out and yelled at the IC, the intelligence community, to figure out from them, like, hey man, it's not us. It turned out to be another foreign intelligence service that was following us. So yeah, so all right, so I felt empowered and cool. And the next day we were walking around, and then they're like, and we tell the justice, I'm not gonna of course name him, but we're out, and we're like, hey, listen, very important, do not wear any insignias, DOJ, anything. I'm like, of course not. But some people do that. So we're walking around, and we see we start taking a walk, and I look down at the third person from the Justice Department. He's wearing shorts that has a DOJ emblem on it. I'm like, oh man. So I'm like I push him in the bushes, and I said, flip around your shorts and take those off. So so that was fun, because then we always had that on them. But that was just a remarkable experience, and that's one of those times, he's just like, this shit's real, and that's where, it's the tradecraft comes in, some of the things you learn. But, we're talking about tradecraft and all those things. It's like again, with being a special agent, you experience so many different things, that you kind of get trained on, as it happens, or right before it happens, or afterwards, right? So then after, all of a sudden, we had some tradecraft, training, but it was pitiful, right? Yeah. I'm not, we weren't spies, we weren't doing that kind of work. And, so then afterwards we had some, tradecraft training, and, we learned a lot, and, checked behind the doors, and, I always carry a doorstop around, and, all the other things, check the mirrors, and, but it was one of those eye-opening experiences. But, just having the opportunity to work internationally and just, learn something new every day, it was just the best.
Let's get into the triathlon training story.
Oh, yeah. So, talking about just, whether or not, people are right for the job. One of the times that the time when I feel like I hopefully live up to at least the bottom tier of being an investigator, having the right stuff is I was training for a triathlon. I do long distance and other types of endurance sports. And I was at the pool. This was several years ago. And I was a couple years into the job. I wasn't yet a boss or anything. And I was swimming in an indoor pool and here on Long Island, right? And like I said, I was indoor pool and I'm swimming, doing laps, and there was a section, and there was a time I was also working child exploitation cases. And not that I wouldn't have been sensitive to someone to, anomalies. I think that's part of like being a decent investigator is to see things that, like the unusual. But I was working a lot of child exploitation cases, which just sucks the life out of you, right? But, as I see children, and then, certainly being a parent, I see someone sitting at the side of the pool, an older fella, and seeing, sitting at the pool, just watching everything that was going on. I said, okay, that was day one. And then there's a lot of children's, taking lessons. And then day two, I'm doing laps, and he happened to be, luckily, in happenstance, kind of sitting in front of my lane. And he's on the chair, and he's wearing a bathing suit, and I think he had his shirt off. I'm like, okay, indoor pool, and he's reading a book. And as I pull up, as I swim up to him, I look up and I see he's holding his book upside down. I'm like, okay, that means something to me. So I'm like, okay, I got out of the pool, I got dressed. I watched him for a bit, and I saw him doing some unusual maneuvers into the locker rooms, following some of the older kids going into the locker rooms. I'm like, okay, so I go to the front desk. I'm like, hey, man, listen, I'm law enforcement. I showed my stuff, and I'm like, hey, listen, can you tell me a little bit more about this guy? And they gave me all, like, oh, he's a teacher. Okay. And he works at, the Stices, and yeah, he's kind of weird, and we just have, some problems with him, but, there's not a lot we can do. I'm like, okay, that's not great. So, we did what we could do, so I'm like, I'm not gonna let this go. So we did, we found out where he lived, we did surveillance on him. We did these things called trash runs, which is not the most glamorous thing, but it's an incredibly important part of the job, is where people put their garbage out at night at some point, and we learn. And once it's on the curb, it's free game, anybody could look at it. So we then steal his garbage. We did this all the time with other cases. Steal his garbage, lay it out in a parking lot down the street, try to find evidence of, credit card bills, or try to find like where his IP address, we could look at his computer, just anything we could do to connect him to some sort of crime. We came up empty. And then just kept watching him. And then I also learned that there had been several reports on him, police reports, finding that he had intimidated children at the locker room at that pool. He tried to, he was peeping into some of the kids, into his shower stall. And I'm like, oh, this is on. I worked so hard on this case, and so many other agents worked with me day and night. Finally, we're like, all right, we can't find anything. So one day we just knocked on his door, and you never know. We knocked on his door. I'm like, hey, showed our creds. Hey, listen, special agents, we think you might have inadvertently downloaded some sensitive national security information on your computer. Can we have a look? Sure. Okay. Signed it away. Guy came in with his big backpack, the computer forensics guy, plugged it in, boop, 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 boop. All these images, child, image, just horrible, horrible images. So it was a really tough case, and then I interviewed him. Once he was faced with that evidence, he confessed, and then we ultimately got an arrest warrant for him and charged him, with possession of child exploitation material. He said, he said that he had never, touched, that wasn't consensual, a young child, boy, but he said he has a preference range.
Right.
It's just, and that's the kind of thing, man. There's a couple things about that type of work. It's like what you have to see in order to make your cases. The evidence is the most horrible things you could possibly see. I don't care if you're a parent or not.
I can't even imagine. And what you just said, though, to use a modern term, triggers me, that he said he never touched non-consensual.
Yeah, who the fuck says that?
Who says that a child can consent?
This is a slippery slope, man. going to that child exploitation, because I want to mention it because the people that do child exploitation cases, state, local, federal, I don't care, they are the fortitude.
I can't imagine.
Unbelievable.
I couldn't.
It's another level of hero.
Yeah.
Right. Like I don't care what you. It takes a toll. We have a couple of local heroes that I love to mention, but like they just do this for a living, and it's relentless. It's because it's one after the other. But the hard thing about it is, one, you have to look at this material. Right. And it's what you were saying. It's like you have to look at this material and present it to the grand jury.
Right.
So you have to describe these things. So here you are, like I said, you're not trained for this ahead of time.
No.
You become this, right? And can you handle it? But this is the other part. Then you have to sit down with them and then you have to interview them. And you can't just be like, you're awful. Tell me all about how you're just a goddamn, like you're the worst of the worst. I want to put you away forever. You got to be like, hey man, I get it. You love them.
Right.
You're just your boyfriend. You love them. You're treating them with love. Oh yeah. Like, and they like, and then, right. And then like, oh no, I love him or I love them. And I would never hurt them. They just want love. And I'm giving them. And then you have to step away from that and just be like, I can't believe I'm dealing with a monster. And then you have to go home at night and look at your kids and be like,
emotionally internalize that.
I feel like I'm not strong. I feel like it would break me. Like I feel, when like I first left the government, I was like, I need a new cause. I need to figure something out. And then I remember there were a couple organizations like Girls Are Not for Sale and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, maybe I'll get into that. And then people started telling me about like what they do. I'm like, I can't do that. Like I can't. I don't know that I trust myself to not go after those people.
No, but that's listen, if you have a warrior mentality, right? You say that, but then once you're given the opportunity to do that, to take these monsters off the street, you go. Like you just, and then, but here it is. How long can you handle? Right? There's a reason that there's they have every agency has periodic psychological evaluation, and there's actually a limit to how long you can do it for, because God help you if you become numb to it.
Right.
And there was a tipping point there was a point where I was just like, I wanted so badly to just take them out, like judge, jury, and executioner.
But see, that's the thing, the executioner part, because that's what I was worried about. I was worried that being exposed to that I would go over that edge. And of course you're going to get caught. Like everybody thinks they're so smart and they're never going to get caught. Like you go on some murder spree, but I wasn't, but that's the thing is like, you guys have the ability to put them in jail. These civilian groups going after them, they don't have that. And so, I mean, I know they're passing off information to law enforcement when they can. But it's got to be very frustrating depending on how local law enforcement a lot of times handles it and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's frustrating, and it's interesting because, like, it's sometimes really difficult to make a case, right? If it's and then there's a very few people that do it. But the problem is the real scary thing. There's so much of it. There's not enough people to work it.
Right.
Like there's few things in federal law enforcement. In law enforcement in general, where I'll bring people together. Everything, there's so much, interagency arguing and infighting and just, sometimes could lead to fist fights just over cases. I've never seen a case where child exploitation, whether it's exploitation of children in person or when it comes to like that, where there's, you don't work together. Like the U.S. attorney or the bosses never have to sit down, right.
And everybody calm down. So
let's just do this. You be the affiant. I don't care. Let's just go. But it's interesting. But you think of it's almost you become like, I knew like there's a point where you become reasonable in a way about it. For example, when you have these conversations with these people, they don't see what they're doing as wrong.
Right.
But then there's others that see 100%. They've been accused of it. They've gone to jail for it. They know what they're doing is wrong.
Right.
They should have just walked off into the somewhere and just lived through in isolation for the rest of their lives. Those are the ones that God help you. We're not stopping until we get you. There was someone I arrested, and he was he was an administrator or a teacher at a school.
Right.
We followed the lead. We ultimately did a search warrant on his home and arrested him. if I met him outside of his house, going to do a warrant and find, for child exploitation, he was a pretty cool guy. And hear me out, like, it's bizarre and I hate to say it. And he said to me, and he said, okay, I do this. He said, I've never touched a child. I will never touch a child. I have a demon inside me and I control it. And I said, he said, I'm glad you caught me. Like yesterday, I'm glad you caught me. And when I get out, if I get out, I'm going to move somewhere where I'll never be a problem.
Yeah.
I'll never, and he was like, you sat down and you talked to him. It's almost like this person had this, he just couldn't shake it. It was a demon inside him.
Yeah.
And it's hard to like digest that and
Right.
to like, I didn't feel sympathy, but it was like for a second, I'm like, I had to shake my head. I'm like, whoa, calm down. Like,
Right.
he's a monster. And
Yeah,
it's,
I didn't know that the DHS was so involved with this until an episode of Darknet Diaries where they talked about two DHS agents who stumbled on it through
Right.
other traffic or money trafficking or money laundering, I think. Yeah, please go ahead. Like
this goes back to the days how we mentioned custom service, right?
Yeah.
So back in the day, most of this material came internationally. How did it come? It came through the mail, through international mail sorting facilities on tapes or magazines. So that's, so it has been a border crime. So ever since I joined the Customs Service, since its inception, it's always been one of the program areas because
Right.
it's international. So you have the smuggling. So if you think of it, so now let's fast forward even to just, 10, 15 years ago when the internet took over. And you have this peer-to-peer and everything's facilitated. Most of it's international. The servers are overseas. Everything's interstate, right? By the nature of it. So that
Right.
brings in the federal, like you could do interstate or you could do international. So that's how, HSI, Homeland Security Investigations kept their hand on it because of that international nexus.
Interesting.
So you also have, not only do you have child exploitation material and people that, that actually, but you also have people that travel internationally,
Right.
right? To South Central America, to
Right.
Asia, right? To these it's brutal. There's actually travel services that cater.
Right.
to-
There's a tourist industry for this.
It's a tourist industry. It is, and it's right. And you, like you were saying before, you were asking about how do you collaborate with these international, these officials. Like it's in plain sight. It's right in front of them. What are they doing about it? Nothing, because there's so much money for them to be made.
Right.
Instead of making $10, an hour, they're making hundreds. And it's not like it's right in plain sight. And it's to your point. It's tourism. It's commerce.
Yeah.
So they're not going to prevent it. And
So-
yeah.
Can I ask your take on, because you've talked about like the money, that there's always money in it, but now like with the DOJ's latest announcement, now we're seeing organizations like 764 that are just these nihilistic organizations that are like not necessarily trafficking, but exploiting kids and stuff like that. And I don't know what the theories are or whatever, if they're being funded by other people or whatever, but like, how do you deal with these organizations that maybe money isn't the goal, but just mayhem?
Right. And that's really difficult. But that's like, like we're talking about, I mentioned before, like MS-13 and Treg, like
Right.
you talk about organizations that are just out there to serve, evil.
Right.
Right. So like you talk about MS-13, for example, like they're not out there killing it. They're not driving out in Lambos. They're not living the high life. They're day laborers by day and then, macheting at night. And, so those are really difficult. That's a really difficult nut to crack, because then it's really difficult to flip. It's very difficult to tap, but it's just the power. There's when it comes to this, I'm just going to transition to like the gang warfare, right? Like now, like the new administration is using the tools that in, previous administrations, like times like have just given the tools, the immigration authorities, right? So then you got to counter it.
Right.
Right. You're going to play a little dirty. They play dirty. You got to just play a little bit dirty too within the confines of the law.
Right.
So if you're going to use immigration authority to deport, to detain them and then deport them based on the variables and have legal deportation orders to get rid of them, then that's the game we have to play if we cannot make that case, like you're saying.
Right.
So you have to look past the criminal, the pursuit of criminal cases, because it's very, very difficult, especially when there's no trail.
Right. If you can't get the RICO on them or the money laundering or whatever, and you can't
there's no
catch
racketeering.
them. Right.
Perhaps maybe if they get greedy, a lot of times they get a little ambitious and they want to start, getting involved in drugs. But, getting back to the old days of, organized crime, like, Italian and this and that, there was like, don't touch drugs.
Yeah.
Don't touch, but then once you do, then it's a slippery slope, because then you have RICO and then you have all these other charges. And narcotics, smuggling charges or possession or distribution is a massive charge compared to some other things. And then you've got, and then again, if you're going to sell things, if you're going to sell bad things or you're going to provide bad services, you're going to make money, and then you're going to have to launder it to some degree. And that's a really big hammer.
Right.
So but that's what I mean. It's being creative, and it's working with the U.S. Attorney's Office, and it's why these cases take years. Like, people are like, why is, like, how are you proud that the case took 5 years? Because that's how long the case takes. It's not an instant case. It's not an hour episode of a show.
Right.
It's not a tour.
Right.
It's just, and that's where, like I said, like, the job gets very complicated and very difficult. And, and that's why it's different than some other jobs that perhaps people that are thinking about going to law enforcement, if you do detective work, of course you work long-term cases and you could collaborate with federal, or you could work great cases on your own. But for the most part, it's the instant cases. You're responding to something that happened. And then, and then all the differences, and you get a great perspective in this job, is because unlike within local law enforcement or state, when you're a federal agent, you get to see you don't take, like in Law and Order, I'm going to use Law and Order. But, you get the case, they make the case, they hand it over to you, the ADA, and then you don't see the detective again, perhaps maybe to testify, right, for a couple hours. When you're an agent, you stick with the case, you interview the witnesses, you pick the jury, right? Like, you sit there, you with the little Post-it notes, and you're like picking out the jury. I'm pretending like I actually know what I'm doing, but like, I'm making Post-it notes and opining on things, but it's a different world. So you get to see in early, if you like, the opportunities I had as a new agent working all these cases and going to trial, I got to see how the whole system works and what sticks. Because as a new agent, you think just a little bit of evidence is good enough. No, there's different levels. You need probable cause to make cases. And to your point, it's like, it takes a lot. So I got to, you get visibility into that world and becoming a better investigator. But it's also frustrating because you know how difficult it is to make these cases ultimately.
Right.
So on that note, you also worked on some federal human trafficking cases too.
Yeah.
Could you tell us about those and kind of the reality of what human trafficking is versus the fantasy, the mythology?
Yeah, it's so it's important. There's a distinction. So there's two ways of humans get are brought into and out of the United States, but I mean it's globally. So don't forget, like, we talk a lot about how people are smuggled and trafficked into the United States, but I want to put this out there that it's an international problem.
Yeah.
The most horrible things, in my opinion, happen in Asia and Europe when the traffic people, not smugglers. So I'll explain the difference. So you have human smuggling, which is essentially a paid service to move you. You're voluntarily asking to come into like another country,
like refugees and things like that.
Or exactly, refugees or just really bad people who just want to get in without presenting their passport. But then you also have trafficked people who are a couple of ways it could happen. It could be you're detained, you're stolen, and then you're put in a container. And this is not a joke. You put in a container on a ship or over the border, the southwest border. And I'll just again to talk particularly about the United States. And you're smuggled you're trafficked into the country to provide a service under force. So, or you could be trafficked in the sense that you could be, aspiring model or an actress in Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
Right. And we saw this all the time and still do. Hey, come join us. You work in Miami as a bartender or work at a club and you'll make tons of money, or an actress or model. Nope. You get here and then they take your passport and they throw you into a room and then you're indentured and then you're stuck. And then they'll threaten you. It's usually organized crime in your home country and they'll threaten your family. Right. So I've seen a couple. I mean, that's so, and then you see children that are trafficked. And I'm sure both of your blood's going to boil when I say this, like you're trafficked in and out of the country for sexual services.
Yeah.
For adults. It's remarkable, but it's real. It's real. And it's trafficked in and out of the border. So I had a few experiences being, like I said, being a Homeland Security investigations agent and a customs agent. You saw human trafficking and smuggling as part of your job. So we worked networks. And the most important experience I had with that was, I had worked cases in human smuggling, enough. On the periphery, like I helped out, I knew enough about it. And then I'm not gonna say in typical government fashion, they're like, hey, listen, you need to go to the department, and become the director of intelligence for the human smuggling cell, right? So like, it was my first experience in working in intelligence, right? So I was assigned to the intelligence service of the department. But at the same time, I was the, tip of the spear on human smuggling networks, on behalf of the United States. So I'm like, okay, so all of a sudden I had to become the subject matter expert. And I remember, the first time I just arrived in a typical government, like, hey, just feel things out, just, get to know like what's going on in the network and just ensure the program's running right and get to meet all your international partners. I remember there's a day I like, hey, you need to go to this embassy and you're going to speak on behalf of the department and it shouldn't be a big deal. I'm like, okay, I've done this before, no big deal when it comes to the other thing, money laundering and narcotics. And I walk into this embassy and they're like, oh, Mr. Rosenblatt. I'm like, yeah. They're like, you're, like, welcome. I'm like, okay. So I sit, of course I backbench it because I'm not sitting at the main table, right? And I sit backbench and they're like, no, like, Mr. You're at the main table. So now all of a sudden I'm sitting next to all these subject matter experts from the State Department internationally. And I'm the head of, human smuggling intelligence for the department. So, fortunately through, my experience as an agent, I worked enough cases that I had something to offer. So that was great because I was just counting the minutes. I don't know if you've had those experiences where you look at the clock, like TikTok, like just, get this over with and hope they don't call on me. Almost like a law student. But they called on me and I had an answer and thankfully they didn't call on me again because I think I used my one shot. But, so that was an incredible experience. So part of the role was to be part of the intelligence service, monitoring the transnational criminal organizations, smuggling undesirables from the Middle East through South America, through Central America, and through Mexico into the U.S., through the U.S. border. So, we talk a lot about human smuggling and trafficking and, how to handle it. And like, it's one of those moments that you realize, like, it's one of those moments again, like, wow, shit's real, because not only do you have people that are just incredibly undesirable who will pay a ton of money or use these networks, to smuggle them there, to get through, through Brazil, get through the Darien, through, the jungle, get smuggled on boat, like it's planes, trains, automobiles. And some of them are treated, it's like a VIP package. And then there's attempted to smuggle through the United States. And fortunately, more times than ever, like they were stopped or the intelligence provided enough information ahead of their arrival in the United States that we were able to otherwise intercept them. But it makes you realize, like, this is part of the job, right? You have this duty to enforce the laws, the smuggling laws, and, people that come into the country illegally, and you want to get rid of the worst or just bad. Like, it doesn't have to be the worst. Right. But then you see what these people firsthand, with my own eyes, see what these people go through, getting through the Darien, like these terrible, this terrain that's on. I don't want my kids walking, barefoot to the pool. Yeah. But these kids are like on their backs, like going through the jungle and doing all these terrible things to get, and through, to the United States. So it's that balance, okay. Right.
Yeah. The Darien, isn't it supposed to be like one of the most dangerous or hostile sort of like areas in the world in terms of like making that trek?
It's that. And then, so if you get through the Darien, congratulations, now you got to deal with the Mexican cartels.
Right.
And the platform bosses who want to then smuggle you through the United States.
Right.
Into the United States. And then, okay, well, if you give them $5,000, will $5,000 be good enough? Will they hold you hostage? Like HSI sees this a lot at the border. Like you have these, they'll move them over the border or they keep them in Mexico, but they'll move them across the border and then hold them in houses and then call their families wherever and say, demand more money.
Right.
And then it's just, what do you do? Right. And then it creates a dangerous situation for everybody. So it's like, it's just a horrible real life experience that seems to be, like we're America. Like, you experience this, you think it's somewhere else.
Right.
It happens here.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember, I think recently reading some statistics that said that like estimates are like 40 million people enslaved around the world right now.
Yeah.
It's insane, right?
Oh, because there's so much money to be made.
Yeah.
And again, like, well, let's I'll transition a bit to the cartels, like the Mexican cartels, right? For generations, right? And the Colombians, but let's talk about the Mexican cartels. It's been heroin and heroin, right?
Yeah.
And for the most part, and some bit of marijuana coming. You have to smuggle that stuff through the border, right? And it's expensive, and it's bulky. And then you transition now into this, to fentanyl.
Yeah.
Right? Like, okay, now you have a couple kilos. Like, you could just put it in the back of a 18-wheeler. You could put it in the cab. You could put it on someone's back or whatever it might be. And it's just, there's more money to be made than ever.
Right.
So you have a big pallet full of drugs, and then instead you could just do the size of a laptop or whatever and make the equivalent.
Right.
So that's where the money goes. So then it's just, so it's just, and now with certain things like, cryptocurrency, which
Right.
is a remarkable thing. It's, it's really terrific in the sense that it's going to bring the world together as far as like settlements and paying for services internationally and help the unbanked. But also, like anything, it's a vulnerability because, like I said, you have to launder the money. But just like any, whether it's real estate or banking, traditional banking or whatever it is, it's a vulnerability, and it's just a new problem to address. So, it's a new generation, it's a new world right now, and I'm sad I'm not an agent anymore to deal with this. But at the same time, I'm like, oof.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's what's going to be required is the international community has to come together, unlike ever before, where you can't work these cases like you asked me earlier about working internationally. It's like, sometimes you have a case that affects the United States, and then you go meet with your international, counterparts, and you try to work a case together, whether it's over there or here. Now with the new generation of money movement, a new generation of drug trafficking and human trafficking and smuggling, with these sophisticated international organizations more than ever, I think that the international law enforcement community, the only way to address it is to come together more than ever. So hopefully that landscape changes.
And somewhere around this time, you also kind of got sucked into Special Operations Command project.
So part of that experience was, I had to, work, and I didn't have to work. I had the privilege of working at Special Operations Command, to work with those fellas. And I was there for a couple weeks and, working on some intelligence briefings. And it was just, what an experience. I never thought, it was one of those moments I'm like, why are they listening to me? Like, I can't believe people are listening to me. Like, it was just a humbling experience, and it was just the best. But the highlight of it, the absolute highlight, was that, for a few weeks I was working with, at Special Ops, and a lot of it's, they're composed of, operators who are like maybe post-retirement or just not in the field anymore, Special Ops, especially SEALs and otherwise, Rangers. And I'd been working with them on these cases, and these intelligence briefings. And one day, the greatest thing happened to me. It was just the greatest thing anybody could say to me. Where they're like, "Hey man, so where'd you work out of? Where'd you come out of?" Meaning, like, they thought I was an operator, the military operator. Not really, and then I'm just some like shiny guy, I'm just a guy who went to federal law enforcement training and did a couple of years as an agent. Went home at night, and with maybe some bad stories, but nothing compared to what they experienced. So the biggest honor I had in my life and the greatest experience was that moment when he's like, "Hey man," he just assumed he thought that I was an operator at some point, and I just felt like walking away out of there and just running and be like, "You can't take it back." But it's one of those moments. It's like, again, like shit's real. Like you realize if you haven't already, like I work in federal law enforcement, certainly attracts a lot of former, retired, military, certainly a lot of military in whatever capacity. And like, and a lot of them, of course, are so humble, like they don't talk about what they did before. But just to, have the opportunity to work with, like, you realize, like, what else is out there. And if you ever think that your job is scary and unpredictable, and you think, oh, poor you're doing 20 years of, what the type of work you do, it's just, there's always someone that's smarter and faster and richer, right? And when you meet some of the military people, all the military people, in fact, that I'd worked with, especially at SOCOM, it was just one of the best experiences of my life. I'm so grateful for it.
Can you say why they pulled you in? Like, what was the point of having a DHS guy there?
Yeah, so like, again, my experience, being in an intelligence program, running that intelligence program for the department, I had a perspective on these transnational criminal organizations, right? So like, where I was able, like we talked about, like, what you can do overtly in the criminal, like the idea of federal law enforcement is to put people in jail, right? We don't conduct renditions, we don't do this, we don't do that, we shouldn't. but we don't. And, so ultimately it's collecting evidence and building a case internationally. So that's what my job was. So while the military and SOCOM, whoever, their role was different, right? My perspective was, this is what I'm seeing as transnational criminal organizations operating internationally. And this is how I think we should go about it. And you tell me, so we all got in a room and said, like, how do we do this? Right? So it was a really healthy perspective. And, how can we collaborate too? Right? Because it's different internationally than it is domestically. You have a little bit more leeway. So it was that was the experience I had. So, so the idea was to walk out of there, and it's different because then I was under military rules, right? Like I couldn't just be like, what are you gonna do about it? It's like, you're getting this done, guys, and like, you can't leave this room, men and women, until you get this job done. And it was like, yeah, sir, yes, sir. And, and that's why I was there for a few weeks doing that kind of work. So, but again, it was one of those experiences that we're talking about. Like, you can make this job everything, or you can make it nothing. Like, I walked out of there a better investigator, a better international investigator. And certainly, like, every day is humbling, when you get to work with other people. But that was just, that brought me home. And that, I think it certainly showed me a lot of leadership skills. Because then from there, I became, the natural progression. I love working, being an investigator. I always thought, like, all right, I want to be a special agent. Like, I compare it, if you become a teacher, you want to teach, right? You come in there because you want to teach. Then you become a principal, you become an administrator. You're not a teacher anymore. So what are you? Is that where you want to be? Not everyone should lead. Not everyone who comes to the job should not be, should move into leadership, because their passions too outweighs their motivation to lead. But I always thought I was just going to be what we call in the business a Terminal 13, a GS 13, which is the highest rank level you could go to before you become supervisor. And I thought that was it for me, because I just loved it so much. But then you're like, and you appreciate this. It's like, you don't want to work for that asshole, right? So instead of like that person get promoted, like, all right, I'll do it. I'll try for it. And then, God knows, like, it never ends in government, like, it's just the suits get, the ties get, more expensive. And, and so it just took me through the ranks in leadership. And that was just one of the most important experiences I had in leadership, because it just showed me how important it is to, for collaboration and just getting things right, and just in listening mostly, in learning.
Can you tell us about how you got involved in the El Chapo investigation?
Yeah, so I definitely never had hands on. I never did, but part of the El Chapo investigation, when he was brought into the United States, it was run, this was like the perfect government collaboration. It was, FBI, it was HSI, DEA, it was NYPD. It was just everybody working together, over a 10-year period, to take down this organization. And when Chapo was finally brought into the United States, and this is, we were talking about money laundering before, the power of money laundering. He was brought in with primary charges of money laundering, right? So, he had a lot of other charges, but part of it, so the El Dorado Task Force, and working with DEA and FBI and NYPD in a lot of areas, were responsible for the prosecution of El Chapo. So at the time, I was running that the El Dorado Task Force, and for a portion of it, because it went on for a long time. So it was just a great experience to watch that trial in person, and see all the hard work that the interagency did, the government's task force did to make that happen. It was just, it was a long time coming, and it was just having that opportunity to be part of that and to lead that program and that prosecution, that team, was pretty great.
What were some of your other perceptions about kind of procedural leave and how that works? From, I believe it was the Mexican Marines that caught him, to his extradition to the United States, and sort of the federal law enforcement role in walking him up into that prosecution.
Yeah, so this is where we were talking before about it's international relations, it's politics, right? I think the date was January 19th of 2016 that Chapo was brought in. I think the inauguration of Donald Trump was on the 20th. So, I don't know if it was a coincidence, but they had him for a long time, being held in Mexico. And I think that it helped facilitate that, that movement to the United States to make that happen. But, that's where a lot of, and again, on being, in this job, you see a lot of the politics, right? Because if you're working international cases, it's not cut and dry. So you see how important the State Department is, how important how the State Department could perhaps, stop a case in its tracks, but or the intelligence communities. There's so much that you don't see, right? It's privileged information, so you kind of have to trust, the other side of the government, the non-law enforcement folks who care about the politics and the intelligence, the value of certain intelligence relationships, to opine, to like be part of that decision of whether, like, for example, like El Chapo comes into the country and when he does, right? So, you saw that he escaped, and then the Special Operations Division of DEA, which is, another great international interagency organization, with HSI, DEA, and FBI, and several other agencies, to work phones and do other things. They did a remarkable job chasing him, through and tracking him throughout Mexico, and ultimately led to his arrest. But like we see today with the conversations with the current administration and the Mexican president, Mexico doesn't, there's a very strong American presence in Mexico, certainly, it's just like a lot of countries, but there's just so much they'll let you do. Because then if you cross that line once, once you cross that line, they might expel you from the country as an individual or as a agency.
Right.
So you got to be really careful. So so you kind of have to just play the politics, and this is where that comes into play. And it's frustrating. I'm sure there's a lot of bosses behind the scene that we're looking at, knowing El Chapo was in custody somewhere, and just is he going to escape again? And probably cursed and had really serious behind the scenes conversations with the State Department, etc. But it happened when it happened, and politics play a big role in international law enforcement.
I guess one of the other topics I want to talk to you about, I guess this is sort of like atmospherics, but you had mentioned to me, before we did the interview, talking a little bit about the sort of current morale in the Department of Homeland Security. Those guys, as you mentioned, they have to deal with politics, domestic politics, international politics, whether they like it or not. It's a part of the job.
Yep.
Oh, what's your sense of the feelings inside the organization today?
It's a rough patch right now. I mean, I went through this. It ebbs and flows. This is not the first time that the agency or the department has been prioritizing immigration enforcement. I mean, that's what that's what the Department of Homeland Security is responsible for, right? I think where not the problem, because this is where, again, like almost bleeding into the idea of if you're working big cases, international cases, or if you're a boss and you're working internationally, there's international politics. With federal law enforcement, I think I'm going to say, unlike other law enforcement, you're working on behalf of the administration's priorities.
Right.
So if the administration, and I'm not saying what they're, prioritizing, getting rid of the worst and good, pretty bad, and everybody is a bad thing. It's terrific in my opinion, but what's happening now, whether it's good and bad for the agents, is that you have a whole government, right? You have the FBI, you have DEA, ATF. I'm going to name them all. Secret Service. I even saw postal inspectors and IRS, agents out on immigration operations under the banner of ICE operations. So you have Homeland Security investigations and other agencies conducting these operations. So yes, it's incredibly important to get, and there was a promise made, and it's important to get, these felons out. I love it. But at the same time, is it at what expense? Where, from a morale perspective, you have people that are doing other important cases. We're talking about all the things we discussed today, and then you have, FBI working some national security cases, and, and ATF working drug and gun cases outside of, the targeting illegal gangbangers and et cetera. It's very difficult for them to accept the idea of okay, well, I'm going to be taking off of this, and for the next few weeks, I'm going to be going after administrative arrests, because at the end of the day, they're administrative, right? And they're not criminal. So, and it's frustrating for everybody. It's frustrating for the U.S. Attorney's Office, because also all their agents are, not able to fulfill their, to write the reports and, find more evidence and go to the grand jury. So it's super frustrating, because then, with every new administration, even if it's a repeat administration, you have new people coming in who don't understand the culture some of the culture is certainly broken. I think but it's government, it's federal government. I love the fact that they're weeding out, there's an opportunity to perhaps get rid of people that feel like they're tenured or, that's the thing with government, especially even with special agents, when it's such a coveted job, you have people that if they get on, you can't get rid of them unless they do something really, really bad. Right. So you own them for the next 25 years. So it's very difficult. So the people that really want to work cases, for the next month, few months, at least, they're going to have to do these administrative arrests. And I know, having done it before on my own, while it's an important mission, it is frustrating because you're so used to doing these criminal cases, and it's like someone telling you that what you're doing is not important. And then also all the talk about certain agencies being perhaps absorbed or broken up. It's frustrating because it's, like I said, it's a new administration who might not understand why things certainly, the way they are, why there's an ATF, why there's an Homeland Security Investigation, why there's other DEA and not, they do one thing and they do it well. Hopefully over time they'll see the value of keeping these agencies whole and then let them return to their primary mission. Because we know that for the next 4 years, immigration enforcement could go on. Like it's a bottomless pit, especially if they exhaust all the priorities, then lead to other, their other, next to a third tier or lower tier priorities of just expelling people that are just otherwise unlawfully present in the United States.
I think I saw a statistic that was like it could take 55 years at the pace. Like it's not a 4-year goal. No,
it's not possible.
Yeah.
Speaking from experience, like, first of all, with administrative warrants, I'm not going to get into the weeds in this because it's kind of boring, but like with administrative warrant, it's not like a criminal warrant where it's like, okay, judge signs it between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. You could execute a search warrant. Anytime you can execute an arrest warrant. So if you see bad guy running into a house and they close the door behind him, you smash that door and follow him through, right? Like on every TV show. With an administrative warrant, you don't have that ability. It's super dangerous.
Yeah.
So like you could just stand out. You can stand outside and you have to wait for them to appear.
Right.
And if they run into a house, so it's really, and if you're chasing after the worst of the worst, think about like I used to worry every day. Like one of the worst parts of being a boss and the most stressful is on those warrants, worrying about what they're doing. Like, oh my, are they safe? Or is something going to happen? And I couldn't wait to that call at 6:10 a.m. after the 6 o'clock hit to make sure everyone's okay. So thank you, because of what's going on, a lot of these agents and officers with ICE have to go into these, almost do these dangerous search warrants, these arrest warrants every day at a disadvantage, right? So and then you have the communities that are like ganging up on them and following them around with cameras and saying, you're evil. I've been subject to that. I mean, I'll just bring up, just because it's aligned with this, during the uprising, in civil unrest rather in New York City back in, I think it was, 2020, 21, 22. Yeah. The Homeland Security Investigator and the other agencies helped NYPD, helped them, secure their precincts, helped secure certain areas of the city. And there was a time when I was just sitting out there, we were wearing our jackets or vests and we're just minding our own business. And I remember specifically, it was FBI, DEA, and ATF and HSI. And we're just walking, someone comes up to us and there's a police barrier just because we're just standing in the middle of the street, securing in the neighborhood. And someone comes up to us, this woman who could have been like my sister, and she comes up to us, she starts cursing at us. Yeah. You guys are scum, you guys are who the hell? I'm like, what? And then, immediately I wanted to bring up this video that I always loved, where there was this, I forgot, some sort of civil unrest in maybe Seattle. And there's this video of them chanting, after police, and they're screaming and screaming. And then someone, in the video, someone sees someone with a gun. And then one of the people chanting changed the chant. She says, call the police, call the police.
Yeah.
And it was just like, and I'm looking at her, I'm like, I so badly want to be like, what, you're brainwashed. Like, what's wrong with you?
What's going on here?
Yeah.
And I'm like, we're here to help. Like, if you knew me and you knew, like, I'm just his dad and, like, all these people I work with are just there to do the job. Like, I don't know anybody in my job, in my experience, who wants harm, right?
Right.
And then to have someone come up to you, you otherwise would have done anything for in the moment. You
Yeah.
would have jumped on them, to protect them, shield them from anything. Coming up and telling you that you're disgusting and you're scum. And that's what, so now you have these, you have these agents from other agencies, whatever, who are then all of a sudden on these ops that they're forced to do. Well, like I said, it's worthwhile, and they're being treated as like evil,
Right.
They're like being told that they're scum and that they're not worth the job. And like, how do you go back and how do you go home at night and feel good about what you've been doing?
Right.
And especially when it's a bottomless pit, like you said.
Yeah.
And it's really hard. It's just, I've been there before, but not to this extent. It's different.
Can you tell us about, you're retired. I mean, maybe you want to tell us a little bit about retirement out of DHS, but sort of like where you are today and some of the things you're working on now.
Yeah. So I retired a few years ago. It was a really difficult move, but I think it was, it was enough. And then I knew that I wanted to get out and work in the financial crimes world. So I've moved. I work for a terrific company. I work in the financial technology sector, doing anti-money laundering, and I'm able to work global law enforcement to try to protect and educate on the blockchain and cryptocurrency. So it's pretty wonderful. I get to do, I get to see what take what I've learned all those years and apply it to protecting, the new generation of money movement. But also, because I just can't leave well enough alone, I had this idea several years ago for a TV show. I don't watch, and I think a lot of people, military and police and ever, you watch these shows, you're like, I'm the most annoying person to watch these shows with. I'm sure you guys are too. Like, yeah. I could watch these police shows. I'm like, pause it. Like, and I go through all the reasons why everything's so stupid, right? And so I'm like, you know what? Like, I want to write a show. I wish there was a show about one that tells stories that aren't ripped from the headlines or made up, because there's so many things that I've seen in my career and others like me have seen that you don't hear about because it's just normal everyday things, but it's stuff that's like in plain sight, close to home, and it's just remarkable stories. But I also really wanted to tell the story because when you watch these shows, and like either the agents or the analysts or the agent, the detectives are like either superheroes or they're broken, right? They're going home and crying, and then the next day they go show up for work, or they're just, unstoppable. And like the whole point of it is like, if we're just normal people doing this job, right? Like half of us don't even know what we got into until it's too late. And then you adjust, or you just, I don't know what you do. But so what I did was I had a friend who's in the industry, who's wonderful, been a mentor, who I told him the story. He's like, hey, that's great, but no one's going to give a crap what you think. You got to put it in writing. So I'm like, okay. He's like, you need to write a pilot. I'm like, yeah, right. I've always enjoyed writing, but I never, pursued it in that way. And then I said, okay, challenge accepted. And about a year and a half ago, I sat down, I studied, I learned about character development and arcs, and I learned, software and writing software. And I just spent about a month and I wrote a TV pilot. Fortunately, I've been working with some, terrific people, to develop it. So I was picked up by a management company, and then we were able to, we filmed a short film based on my pilot, which, has served several purposes. So hopefully, we could get it out there in the world. It's called Harm's Way. And it's true stories about everyday life of special agents. There's true stories about, like I said, that principal who you never suspect, or the teacher you never suspect of being pedophiles, or, or drug traffickers, or, terrorists that live next door. Terrorists in Brooklyn, things that I know are true, and that you haven't heard about. So, hopefully the story's going to be told. Hopefully, it'll turn into a TV series. But right now we have a wonderful short film called Harm's Way.
That's amazing. Yeah, please let us know how that goes. We want to plug it when, yeah.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd love to, if you don't mind, I could say, you can follow it on Instagram at Harm's Way Film.
Yeah,
cool.
Yeah.
Is it available to watch now?
It's short. There's a teaser out there right now.
Okay.
And then it should be available soon. But we have a lot of
Harm's Way Film. We'll put it in the links.
Yeah, it's Harm's Way Film.
If you don't mind if I ask you, I don't know how much you can talk about this, but you just said terrorists in Brooklyn and stuff like that. Especially with sort of the border crisis we had over the last 4 years and whatnot, like what do you take as a realistic assessment of not just like TDA or people like that, but of like larger threats? Or
political terrorist or ideology
terrorist,
religious terrorist. Listen, I know for certain that there's been a lot of it's just fact, like people are smuggled into the country or remain in the country that are operators on behalf of it could be Taliban, it could be, other, terrorist organizations. They make their way into the United States, whether they're sleeping or they wanted to change their life and escape into the United States. But at the same time, like behind them are people that will not be happy that they're defectors and that might come follow them. I mean, for example, I'll just, parallelly talk about, the Chinese. The government has, you've read in the news that they have these secret police stations operating in New York. Right? So what's their job? It's to track down, expats and defectors, and do whatever they might want to do with them, rendition them, secretly, or just get them back. So I think the probability is really high that there's similar organizations operating in the U.S. And whether or not they're planned, just like in any intelligence organization, right? Like as they get bigger and emboldened and funded, part of their job is to operate internationally. As intelligence or operators, and it's something that I'm sure we're going to have to face again very soon. I mean, God forbid, law enforcement, and especially New York, NYPD, and the international community and federal, task forces are doing an incredible job of intercepting this information and hopefully stopping before something happens. But there will be a day.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, again.
Yeah. Yeah. You only have to get lucky once, right?
It's scary, and that's what I'm talking about. I'm not even talking about like it's hidden in plain sight. It's just and it's scarier than people really want to understand.
Right, and I think I don't know if it was NYPD or federal, but like they have stopped a couple of assassinations here around New York.
Iranians,
the Iranian, the Iranians and stuff like that.
Right, or bombing temples, and and right. It's just it's this opportunity, and it's just like I said, like your point, like NYPD works with federal. I mean, NYPD has detectives locate. They have them at around the world.
Yeah,
they have detectives and intelligence folks from NYPD like located around the world to collect this intelligence and disseminate it. So it's just like I said, like in the same way that we're trying. I think the international community needs to come together better to combat money laundering and other transnational criminal organizations. To solve this problem, to mitigate this problem or prevent it or do whatever you can is, the international community has to collaborate. And unfortunately, what I saw in 9/11 is that like you have a window of opportunity after something. The government responds to terrible things.
Yes.
Right? People accept, I'm not going to say violence, but aggressive government activity. For example, what happened after 9/11.
Right.
Me walking around the streets with an MP5 hanging around my neck, and it was cool because they're like, okay, we need to protect me, please. But that opportunity fades very quickly, and I think, unfortunately,
we got you.
Okay.
Yeah, we got you.
Okay. Unfortunately, something might have to happen again in order for people to like say, okay, to reset and recalibrate, understand like what it takes. Sometimes, aggressive activity, sometimes violence is required.
Yeah.
And strong action and deporting people, right, who seem otherwise, they seem okay. No, you don't know they're okay.
Yeah.
We know, like the government knows the truth, and the judges aren't going to sign off on things criminally and administratively unless they have the evidence. So I think it's going to take something, like this, something bad to happen, even if it's minimal, to people to accept it again. Yeah. Or maybe not. I think people are, I don't know if there's a way back.
Erik, anything else you want to put out there that we haven't covered in the interview so far?
No, I mean, I think we covered so much, and I think I hope, I just wanted to put it out there about, like it's what's happening now, put it out there, and just the heroes of federal law enforcement and local law enforcement and intelligence community and everyone, what they're up against. And I hope they know, everyone knows, and anybody listening is going to appreciate what's going on behind the scenes. That everyone's just trying to do a job. And the other takeaway is, selfishly, I hope that people, take an opportunity to support, Harm's Way, hopefully as it transitions into something,
absolutely,
television. Just again, like it's not me. It's just the opportunity to tell the story about this other side of the world, especially now, and just to help people understand, like these are just people that came out of could have done a lot of different things, had different degrees in this and that, or and decide to dedicate their lives to doing something that's dangerous, unusual. There's a lot of sacrifice and people might not see it because they're not in uniforms. And, just because, they're following a mission that's the administration orders, I think people really need to understand that it's just, they're following orders because they just want to do good in this world.
Erik, thank you for coming on the show tonight. We'll have some links down in the description for folks who are interested in checking out the film or its current state that's publicly available. Yeah, thanks for doing this, man. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I appreciate this too.
And everyone else out there, we will see you next week. Maybe later this week, depending on how things are going. Yeah. So we'll see you guys then. Hey guys, it's Jack. I just want to talk to you for a moment about how you can support the show if you've been watching it, enjoying it, but you'd like to get a little bit more involved and help us continue to do this. You can check out our Patreon. It is patreon.com/theteamhouse. And for $5 a month, you can get access to all of these episodes of The Team House ad-free. The same goes with our affiliated podcast, Eyes On, with Andy Milburn, Jason Lyons, Mick Mulroy. That one, you will also get all of those episodes ad-free. And you support the channel and the show, and we really appreciate it. The Patreon members are literally what has helped this company, this small business survive, especially during our early years. And you are what continues to help this thing going, even as we navigate the turbulent world of YouTube advertising. So we really appreciate all of you guys. There's going to be a link down in the description to that Patreon page. And there is also going to be a link to our new merch shop. So if you guys want to go and get some Team House merchandise, we got stickers and we also have patches. And I should mention, if you sign up for Patreon at $10 a month, we will mail you this patch as well. So we really appreciate that. But they're also for sale on the merch shop. And additionally, they got t-shirts up there, water bottles, a tote bag, coffee mugs, all that good stuff. So please go and check them out and support the show. We really appreciate it, guys. Thank you.